The appointed hour having arrived and there being a quorum, we'll call the meeting to order. Here comes Commissioner Pai. Welcome to the April meeting. Madam Secretary, would you please tell us what we have on the agenda today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on proposals to support real-time text communications over Internet Protocol communications networks to improve the accessibility of these networks for consumers who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, and speech-disabled. Second, you will consider a tariff investigation order and a further notice of proposed rulemaking proposing a new regulatory framework for the provision of business data services. Third, you will consider an order on reconsideration and a second report and order that will finalize rules for the innovative spectrum sharing regime it created for making 150 megahertz available in the 3.5 gigahertz band. Please note the consent agenda, as listed in the Commission's April 2016 Sunshine Notice, has been deleted from today's agenda, and items 1 through 5 on the consent agenda were adopted by the Commission. This is your agenda for today. The first item, entitled Transition from TTY to Real-Time Text Technology, will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Allison Cutler, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, today the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau presents to you a notice of proposed rulemaking on the transition from TTY to real-time text for IP-based services and equipment. This notice moves forward a superior accessibility solution, uniquely tailored to the IP environment, that can address the needs of people with disabilities who use text to communicate as we make the transition from circuit switch to IP-based services. To facilitate a seamless migration, the item outlines proposals that balance the need for disability access to 21st century communication technologies with the flexibility needed by industry to drive innovation and competition. We wish to acknowledge the work done by the disability organizations, engineering research centers and innovators, and AT&T, who filed the petition for rulemaking to help bring this innovative technology. Joining me at the table today are Karen Pelt-Strauss, Bob Aldrich, and Susie Rosen-Singleton of CGB. In addition, I would like to thank Elliot Greenwald in the Disability Rights Office and Henning Scherzlering of the Office of Strategic Planning for their contributions to the item. Finally, I wish to thank the many individuals in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Wireline Competition Bureau, and the Office of General Counsel for their hard work to support the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. TTY technology was developed for the public switch telephone network over 50 years ago. There's consensus that this technology is not reliable in today's Internet-enabled communications environment. Because it can result in packet loss and transmission errors, TTY has been steadily declining over the past decade. Put simply, this is not a suitable technology for people with disabilities in the 21st century. In contrast, real-time text was built for the IP environment. It can be used to place a call just the same way as a voice call is placed. Unlike SMS and other messaging services, when a person types real-time text, the text is immediately received by the other party. That is, just like with voice communications, you don't need to first complete the message and press send for it to be received. This can be critical in emergency situations, and in regular conversations it allows the natural flow that is characteristic of voice telephone calls. Real-time text is also faster than TTYs, allows for simultaneous voice and text, and permits users to type symbols as well as characters in multiple languages. Most importantly, real-time text can, for the first time in our nation's history, finally enable people with disabilities who rely on text to become fully integrated into the same communications network that everyone else uses. If universally implemented, its users will be able to call anyone at any time without the need for any specialized equipment. This will facilitate private, independent, and direct communications. We are happy to report that several carriers, realizing these many benefits, have already begun moving forward with the implementation of this technology on their wireless networks. Now, Susie will provide you with the details about this notice.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This notice proposes to amend current rule provisions to require support for real-time text as a replacement technology for TTYs and IP-based wireless networks. To ensure effective communication services, this notice proposes full interoperability across communication systems to allow any real-time text user to connect with any other user over any covered provider or device used by either party to the call. To achieve this, the notice proposes a non-proprietary technical standard, RFC 4103, as safe harbor. Now, the notice proposes to ensure backward compatibility with TTY technology for a period of time so that consumers who still use TTYs, including senior citizens, low-income individuals, and persons living in rural communities who do not have broadband access, can continue to communicate with real-time text users. The item asks for an appropriate timeline for the sunset of this obligation. The notice also proposes to require wireless service providers to support certain functionalities, including the ability to initiate and receive calls using a phone number, to use voice and text simultaneously on the same call, and to make conference calls. Further, the item proposes to require that new wireless handsets and other devices that already have the capability to send, receive, and display text to support real-time text. The item proposes that these rule changes become effective for Tier 1 wireless carriers by December 31st, 2017, a date indicated to be feasible by several carriers. The notice seeks comments on an appropriate timeline for smaller carriers. The item also seeks comment on appropriate outreach to the public regarding the migration from TTYs to real-time text. The item also seeks comment on an appropriate, in addition to proposing these rules changes for IP-based wireless networks, the item seeks comment on whether IP-based wireless networks should similarly be required to support real-time text. We believe that these proposals will ensure that the millions of Americans who are deaf, hard of hearing, speech disabled, and deaf-blind can use 21st century technology to communicate with businesses, colleagues, relatives, friends, and most importantly, emergency services. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. And now we are pleased to share a video clip to demonstrate real-time text technology. Our thanks to the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. This video shows how real-time text services allow for conversational, real-time, back and forth, like you might experience on a voice phone call. In this example, you will see that real-time text can be very beneficial in emergency situations where incomplete messages that are conveyed without having to hit send can literally be life-saving. And here's the video.
Thank you to the presenters. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Good morning. I strongly support today's notice of proposed rulemaking, not only because it is one of those rare gems that enjoys unmitigated endorsement of a broad base of stakeholders, including consumer organizations, telecommunications providers, and trade associations, but it also significantly furthers my desire to connect communities and promote universal opportunities for all. There is no question that TTY was a transformative and welcome technology when it was developed over 50 years ago. Prior to its introduction, those in the deaf and hard of hearing community were unable to truly harness the benefits of communications by telephone. They had to rely on the assistance of family, friends, and neighbors to make calls. They had to travel long distances in order to engage in face-to-face conversations, and too many lacked the means to contact 911 emergency services in times of distress. TTY radically improved the quality of life for those who were separated from the rest of society when it came to Alexander Graham Bell's great invention. Like so many other inventions, this technology has evolved, making TTY obsolete in today's IP-based communications environment. So we officially and enthusiastically embrace the more modern solution that takes advantage of the technological innovations and services developed over the past 5 decades and better enables those consumers who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or speech-disabled to conduct business and stay connected with their friends, families, and most importantly, emergency services. The benefits of real-time text are myriad and notable. Designed for IP networks, it is faster, more reliable, and easier to use. It facilitates real-time interaction and enables a greater range of possibilities for communications, including the seamless integration of voice and text, the ability to communicate in languages other than English, and most importantly, the ability to contact 911 emergency services in real time without having to press send to initiate the dispatch of assistance. Available on smartphones, tablets, or any other internet-connected device that has a keyboard and a screen. Real-time text, unlike TTY, does not require the procurement of a separate device. It is highly mobile. This is a highly mobile, accessible solution that provides all consumers with a 21st century means of keeping in touch and seamlessly connects users to their community. But TTY, still the only technology of its type used on the PSTN, remains a vital lifeline for those who rely on it, including senior citizens, rural residents, and those who do not have or cannot afford high-speed internet access. Because of this, the notice correctly proposes a backward compatibility requirement to ensure non-interrupted access for those consumers who continue to depend on TTY. The notice also seeks comment on whether it would be particularly beneficial for ICS providers to offer real-time text to inmates. I specifically requested the inclusion of this line of inquiry because I am ever mindful of the unique challenges of deaf and hard of hearing inmates, the challenges that they face connecting with loved ones outside of prison walls. The Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau once again should be applauded for its leadership and stellar work on this item. We are on the path of providing consumers who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or speech-disabled greater privacy and independence, more portable and less expensive options, and the ability to take advantage of novel communication services as they emerge. That is no small feat, and the hard work of everyone involved to get to this point is commendable. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcester.
Earlier this year, 2 University of Washington college students on a $100 budget designed a pair of gloves. Now these gloves, still a prototype, were about function and not fashion. But armed with wireless sensors, they can translate sign language into text and speech in real time. This is exciting stuff. It allows the deaf and speech disabled to communicate in sign language with those who do not sign. And earlier this month, these students were awarded the Lemelson MIT Student Prize to further develop their gloves, which currently recognize only a limited set of signs. But on a $100 budget, hey, you can understand. So think about this development, and then think about text telephone technology, or TTY. TTY is a relic. TTY was first widely deployed in the 1970s to help deaf, hard of hearing, and speech-disabled individuals send and receive person-to-person text over telephone lines. There was a time when it was revolutionary, but that date has long since passed. The machines are bulky, cumbersome devices, and they have none of the sleek features of today's smartphones. Moreover, TTY is ill-suited for transmission over IP networks. Technology is marching on, and gloves may even be leading the way, but no matter where we go, it is clear that it is time to move beyond TTY systems and embrace the future. So today we adopt a rulemaking to improve text-to-text communications options for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, and speech-disabled. We seek comment on the possibilities of real-time text, and of course, real-time text offers immediate transmission of text and allows for both parties to type at once, a definite improvement over traditional TTY. Even better, this technology is generally available on off-the-shelf devices, making larger market scale and more innovation more possible. So goodbye to 1970s era TTY hardware, and hello to communications technology that reflects the digital age. I look forward to the record that develops and thank both carriers and the disabilities community who have pressed the case for real-time text. Thank you also to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and Disabilities Rights Office for your willingness to embrace what is new and your enthusiasm for moving disability access policies forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Last week, I had the privilege of visiting Gallaudet University. There, I met with Dr. Christian Vogler, the director of Gallaudet's Technology Access Program, Research Associate Paula Tucker, and Senior Research Engineer Norman Williams. I'm glad to see that each of them is here today. They educated me about the innovative work being done to ensure that communications technologies meet the needs of people with hearing and speech disabilities. In particular, Dr. Vogler described the research that his team has been doing on how real-time text, or RTT, is improving the lives of people with disabilities. We even saw some of that technology for ourselves when Dr. Vogler and I had a conversation using real-time text. One real advantage of real-time text is that the text is transmitted instantaneously. Unlike TTY, SMS, or other legacy messaging services, you don't need to type out an entire message with RTT and then press send, or use an intermediary to communicate. Dr. Vogler explained that this allows for a more natural conversation because you can see and anticipate what the other person is trying to communicate. It also lets you communicate much more quickly and efficiently than you can with those other messaging services. This is particularly important when it comes to public safety, as we saw during the demonstration earlier. And that's because exchanges on 911 that could take minutes using a legacy technology can be completed in seconds using RTT. RTT has other benefits as well. It is based on the Internet Protocol, or IP, which means it is a highly adaptable digital technology. It is interoperable across networks and devices, which means that consumers do not need to find or, in some cases, purchase specialized equipment. And it is far more reliable than legacy offerings, which means that those who use it can have the comfort that it will work in a moment of need. Now, based on my meeting at Gallaudet, the Technology Access Program's meticulous December 2015 technical report on RTT, and other record evidence, I believe that RTT represents a significant step forward over legacy technologies, such as TTY. But, as is too often the case, regulation has not kept pace with technological change. An issue that I have stressed during my time at the FCC is the need for the agency to embrace the IP transition, to update the agency's regulations, to recognize and encourage the migration from legacy technologies to new ones. That need is acute in this context. For, despite the many benefits of RTT, our rules still require carriers to support antiquated TTY technology. This harms many consumers, particularly those who want to use advanced IP-based offerings, such as Wi-Fi calling or voice over LTE or VoLTE. That's because TTY doesn't work, or doesn't work very well, on IP-based networks. As a result, our TTY requirement has slowed down the deployment of next-generation IP-based offerings. Thankfully, today's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NOTICE, proposes to eliminate the TTY requirement. This will bring us closer to an all-IP world. So the NOTICE has my support, and I will be voting to approve. I'm also pleased that the FCC takes a far different approach to text to 911 than it did just a short while ago. In 2014, I dissented from the FCC's decision to impose a text to 911 requirement based on fading SMS technology. I noted back then that SMS has inherent limitations that, for 911 purposes, render it inappropriate for use as anything other than an interim, stopgap measure. I pointed out that SMS messages can be delayed, lost, or delivered out of sequence. I also pointed out that adopting an SMS-based requirement would take us off the path to NG 911 by diverting resources that could otherwise be devoted to IP-based offerings, including reliable, real-time text. I thus specifically urged my colleagues in 2014 to focus instead on, quote, allowing all consumers, including those with speech or hearing disabilities, to have reliable, real-time text communication with emergency responders. My views didn't carry the day back then, but I am glad that they are reflected in today's rulemaking. The notice acknowledges what it describes as major concerns with SMS-based text messaging. It tentatively concludes that real-time text will be a more reliable solution for emergency communications. It also recognizes the view that real-time text can have a broader and beneficial impact on the NG 911 transition. We are finally moving in the right direction on these issues. I hope that we're able to finish our work with dispatch for the benefit of all Americans with hearing and speech disabilities. Or, in recognition of the 1984 visit to Gallaudet by the late but immortal Prince, let's go crazy. The dawn of the all-IP age will allow everyone with such disabilities to party like it's 1999. Thank you very much.
I win the pool, whether or not you would reference Prince today. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Eyes on for a reason.
That seems like a sucker bet. I don't know anyone who didn't have the same conversation coming down here. So. The time has long passed to dispose of the antiquated 1970s TTY technology. This outdated system has been largely abandoned by people with disabilities in favor of new, commercially available solutions tailored to a world of mobile devices, the internet, and applications. For this reason, I fully support a proceeding to eliminate the Commission's obsolete wireless TTY requirements. At the same time, I have serious concerns about the proposal to implement rules to replace TTY with real-time text requirements. While the technology seems promising, the FCC's role is problematic. Americans with hearing loss are already huge supporters and adopters of existing alternatives that are exceptionally popular among those without hearing loss. In some, the private sector has created technologies, better known as apps, preferred by people with disabilities, and that far exceed the functionality of government-mandated TTY, all without a single regulation. Regulation seems even more dubious when large providers have committed to developing this technology and making it interoperable. Well, that's just not good enough for some people here at the Commission. Instead, the Commission is prepared to require that wireless providers and manufacturers make this technology a native function in a device, or at a minimum, provide it as a pre-installed application without any actual evidence that it's truly needed. The Commission's current proposals would clearly pick a favored technology over those others and those yet to be developed. In my mind, this is the very definition of a violation of technological neutrality. To make matters worse, the Commission is asking questions that could dictate the functions and development of RTT. For instance, there are proposals and questions regarding character and text capabilities, quality standards for latency and error rates, abilities to perform simultaneous voice, text, and video functions, whether standard interfaces are needed to promote device portability, and should RTT characters such as emojis be converted into text to promote backwards compatibility to TTY. Many of these ideas seem to exceed the standard of providing functional equivalency for voice communications. Setting standards and mandating technologies appears to go beyond ensuring that equipment and services are accessible and usable by individuals with disabilities. I am skeptical that the benefits of such regulation would exceed the costs, and the costs could expand well beyond the wireless technology mandate. Moreover, if RTT develops as some expect, maybe we should have taken the time to inquire as to whether TRS funding can be reduced and the program eliminated, either in whole or in part. Let me be clear. People with disabilities have certain legal protections intended to ensure that they benefit from modern technologies. The problem becomes in determining the best means to achieve this goal. In today's world of text, IM, video conferencing apps, I cannot support a broad conclusionary statements that the proposals contained in the item are necessary to ensure that people with disabilities continue to have effective access to wireless communications, or that RTT is the only technology that is functionally equivalent to voice. Nor am I convinced that RTT is necessary for disabled persons because SMS is an insufficient means to contact emergency services. An ironic argument when the Commission implemented text to 911 based on current SMS technologies. Simply put, I want to ensure that private sector investment and innovation continue to provide communication solutions that make lives easier not only for those with disabilities, but all Americans. By providing preferential treatment and mandated implementation of a particularly commercially available technology, we will hinder competition, further future investment, and the next generation of texting or accessible offerings. For this reason, I must dissent in part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner? This morning, I learned a new sign. Cool. This is cool. And I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. You have the right end. All in favor?
I don't need a picture of that.
The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted, and the item is adopted. Thank you very much to all of you. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Business Data Services in an Internet Protocol Environment. Matt Del Nero, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
This is the full lineup today.
We were going to bring some kids too. What kid wouldn't enjoy business data services?
Mr. Del Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Today, we're pleased to present for your consideration a tariff investigation order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on a new regulatory framework for the business data services market. This $45 billion market of business data services, historically known as special access, are a critical input in our nation's economy, providing dedicated data services to offices, banks, hospitals, schools, as well as backhaul to the wireless industry, a need that will become even more intense with the rollout of 5G networks and cell densification. The further notice identifies a new path forward and seeks comment on replacing the existing regime with a technology-neutral framework that would better tailor regulation to non-competitive areas to help ensure that rates charged for business data services are just and reasonable. The tariff investigation order identifies tariff and other contractual terms and conditions that are unreasonable under the Act and harm competition and technology transitions. The order and further notice were developed by the Wireline Competition Bureau with substantial input from the Office of General Counsel and Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis. I thank the entire Business Data Services team. It's a collaborative group and talented group of economists, lawyers, and data experts. While in the interest of time, I'm not able to mention each of them by name, I'm deeply grateful for their dedication and their hard work, which produced the item we offer for your consideration today. Seated with me at the table from the Wireline Bureau are some members of that team: Dina Shetler, David Zessiger, Billy Layton, Pam Arluck, Bill Kehoe, Marv Sachs, and Chris Coves. Also from the Office of General Counsel, WCB alum, as he'll always be, and member of the General Counsel's Office, Bill Dever. I also would like to acknowledge Eric Ralph, the Bureau's chief economist, who led the substantial economic analysis in the item before you. He and his wife are on a well-deserved adventure vacation in Colorado. He offered to bring a satellite phone with him. I said that was not necessary. And also would like to thank Professor Mark Reisman, who prepared the white paper attached to the further notice. Chris will now present the further notice, followed by Marv, who will present the tariff investigation order.
Thank you, Matt. The further notice before you seeks comment on fundamentally reforming the way the Commission measures competition and regulates business data services. It seeks comment on replacing the existing fragmented pricing flexibility regulatory regime with a new technology-neutral framework that classifies markets as competitive, subject to minimal regulation, and non-competitive, subject to light-handed pricing regulation. The further notice begins by comprehensively surveying the market for these services, largely benefiting from the 2015 data collection. Based on this analysis, the item seeks comment on the development of a new data-driven competitive market test to identify areas where competition likely exists and seeks comment on the key elements of that test. To safeguard consumers in non-competitive markets, the further notice seeks comment on pricing rules to replicate the beneficial incentives of competition, maintaining price caps for legacy circuit-based services, and adopting anchor pricing or benchmarking for IP-based services. It also asks important questions about the scope of regulation in these non-competitive markets, including, for example, how to determine the party or parties to which it should apply. The further notice also seeks comment on targeted requirements, such as a prohibition on tying between competitive and non-competitive markets to preclude anti-competitive conduct and facilitate appropriate oversight. Finally, to ensure that any approach adopted would be technology neutral and that similarly situated providers would be subject to the same regulatory regime. The further notice seeks comment on eliminating certain anomalous regulatory exemptions to ensure all business data services providers are subject to the same rules. The further notice seeks comment on these options and other alternatives to help ensure that rates charged for these critical services are just and reasonable. Marv Sachs will now present the tariff investigation order.
Thank you, Chris. Last October, the Bureau initiated an investigation into certain terms and conditions in 22 tariff pricing plans for business data services offered by AT&T, CenturyLink, Frontier, and Verizon. As a result of that investigation, the order finds that 3 categories of terms and conditions constitute unreasonable practices under Section 201B of the Communications Act. The order directs the removal or modification of these provisions from the relevant tariffs. First, the order finds unreasonable so-called all-or-nothing provisions that require customers to make all their purchases from a single tariff plan. It finds that these provisions unreasonably limit the ability of large customers to manage their purchases because in many instances they have no practical choice but to buy services from these plans. The order further explains that these provisions also unreasonably restrict purchasers' ability to consider competitive alternatives and manage their transition to IP services like Ethernet. The order prohibits the use of all or nothing provisions prospectively and seeks further comment on how to implement this finding for existing agreements. Next, the order finds unreasonable, excessive, and shortfall in early termination penalties, assessed when customers are unable to fulfill their volume or term commitments under a pricing plan. The order finds that these penalties are unreasonable to the extent they impose costs on a customer that exceed the provider's opportunity costs and limit a customer's ability to make efficient choices regarding competition and transitioning to IP services. The order directs the carriers under investigation to remove these provisions from their tariffs and resubmit them at levels no greater than the amount of revenue a customer would have paid had it met its minimum commitments. The Bureau recommends adoption of the further notice and tariff investigation order and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Marv, Chris, Matt, everybody. Commissioner Clyburn.
At the core of a successful community is a vibrant and growing business sector, be it a large multinational corporation in need of dedicated high-capacity circuits or a small local business seeking to run a handful of ATMs. They both have one thing in common: the need for dedicated wireline circuits for connectivity. These services also support public safety operations, hospitals, and healthcare facilities. All of this underscores the importance of reliable, robust services. Business circuits are also a necessary input for mobile broadband service, as these networks are only wireless just prior to hitting the cell tower. Then they become reliant on a wireline backhaul. A fast wireless network needs high-capacity wireline connectivity when it reaches that tower, and if that is not in place, service will slow as soon as it hits or reaches those backhaul facilities. And if rates for backhaul connectivity are unreasonable, providers must either pay more or offer consumers slower speeds. Either way, consumers and their communities are disadvantaged. This is why we need to ensure that special access, what the chairman has renamed Business Data Services, it's going to take me a minute, are both available and reasonably priced. It should come as no surprise that our comprehensive data collection shows that where competitive pressures exist in the special access market, it's going to take me a while, prices are reduced. But what is less clear is that the number of providers necessary for this to happen, the appropriate geographic area for the market, and the relevant product markets. These are all issues where further stakeholder engagement, I believe, is needed. And while I wish we lived in marketplace nirvana, where competitive options are omnipresent, the reality is this does not exist. In areas that are non-competitive, I believe it is appropriate to have a regulatory backstop to ensure that the rates, terms, and conditions for services are just and reasonable. Agreeing on these principles, that's the easy part. Implementation, a bit more challenging. A framework that minimizes regulation when market forces are sufficient to discipline prices, that must be in place. But we must also have a simple and easy way to administer this regulatory backstop. That needs to be in place where competitive forces are lacking. But make no mistake, I greatly appreciate the significant work the Bureau has put into this item, as well as the chairman's willingness to accommodate my many, many edits. At the same time, I must confess to being concerned about the complexity of some aspects of the further notice and how feasible it will be for the agency to administer for the entities that provision the facilities as well as the providers that purchase these services. We need to ensure that reforms are targeted, and while being technology neutral is beneficial, reforms must also take into account the nature of the market. The chairman agreed to make the item more neutral by, for example, moving away from a tentative conclusion that 50 megabits is the appropriate metric for assuming whether a market is competitive or not, asking about the implications and feasibility of administering the reforms, and seeking comment about alternative frameworks so that we can develop a complete record which enables all parties to have the opportunity to make their best case. I must thank him for that. I also appreciate his willingness to ensure parties have sufficient time to analyze the proposals and comment. And while a robust record is always beneficial, I believe an ideal outcome is one in which the industry comes together and proposes a solution that ensures the policy goals are realized. I know this is possible because we have seen it take place before in the legacy wireline space, from calls, remember that, and more recently to the 2011 reform in intercarrier compensation in universal service, which produced win-wins for the agency and the stakeholders. So I support today's item, not only because we have been working for years to arrive at this point, but because we are asking how to develop a new, modern framework to govern business data services. From my perspective, all options are on the table, and I hope that the ultimate result will be a framework, as mentioned earlier, that is simple, targeted, and easy to administer. In addition, I am in support of common sense fixes in the tariff investigation order that will prevent unreasonable practices that may inhibit providers who wish to move to IP services. I am grateful to the dedicated and hard-working team from the Wireline Competition Bureau. You have maintained your focus and sense of purpose as you collected and analyzed an incredible amount of data. You built a tremendous record in this complex and incredibly important proceeding, and for that and more, I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
We can call them special access services or call them business data services, but we should acknowledge that they are important. These are the high-capacity dedicated services that sustain our wireless networks, facilitate commercial transactions, and underpin communications that American businesses rely on every day. 4 years ago, the Commission suspended aspects of its special access policies. The agency determined that its turn-of-the-millennium rules designed to provide greater flexibility for these services were not working as intended. In fact, they were leading to some strange results. Consider, for instance, that under our old policies, more competitive flexibility was available in Flint, Michigan, than in New York City. Somehow, our framework was both over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time. Something was not right. So the Commission set off to update and modernize special access policy. And to do so, we collected data. Lots and lots of data. In fact, we assembled perhaps the single largest data set in the history of this Commission. But that was the easy part. And now comes the hard part, finding a way forward. Today we set this process in motion. We adopt an order that finds specific special access tariff provisions, like excessive early termination fees, unlawful. Then we move to a broader rulemaking to modernize special access policy. As we proceed, I believe 3 principles should guide us. First, our policies must feature incentives for providers to build and invest in networks. Infrastructure matters, and we need to encourage its deployment. Second, our policies must enhance competition. Competition benefits consumers and leads to greater innovation. And third, our policies must be capable of administration. It is simple to draw complex conclusions from the data before us, but we must modernize special access in a way that is both smart and practical. So I look forward to the record that develops and thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for its not inconsiderable efforts.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
After finishing her adventures in Wonderland, the eponymous Alice travels through the Looking Glass to find a world where nothing makes sense. To go anywhere, Alice must walk in the opposite direction. To stay in the same place, Alice must run as fast as she can. Reading today's notice, it appears that the Commission has followed Alice through the Looking Glass because practically nothing in it makes any sense. Let's start with the basics. Special access is a term as vague as this 193-page notice is arcane, and I think we can all agree on that. But the concept is pretty simple. Some businesses want high-capacity data services. Many of those businesses are themselves communications companies, like multi-billion-dollar nationwide wireless carriers and publicly traded middle-mile transport companies. And some of them are non-communications companies, from department stores to coffee chains. Now, for many years before the Internet age, the FCC took an intrusive approach to regulating these so-called special access telecommunications services. It micromanaged the rates and terms of service offered by incumbent telephone companies, with the result that we essentially had not-so-competitive regulated monopolies. But during the Clinton administration, the FCC decided to spur greater competition by getting rid of central planning. It hoped that a market-based approach would incentivize greater competition. Today, those efforts have borne fruit. Here are some undisputed facts. Many companies are competing in the enterprise data services market. 491 facilities-based competitors, to be exact. Traditional telephone companies once dominated the market with DS1s and DS3s. But today, enterprise customers are quickly abandoning those services for unregulated, high-capacity, next-generation networks. In 2013, enterprise customers spent $18.9 billion, or 42.2% of total revenues, on unregulated Ethernet and other packet-based services. That year alone saw a 31.6% increase in Ethernet bandwidth provisioned by competitive providers, compared to a 5.3% increase for incumbents. And by 2013, competitors had deployed competing facilities in 83.9% of census blocks and almost 86% of buildings with enterprise customers. Now, since then, competition has only become more intense. Revenues for enterprise data services grew almost $2 billion over the next 2 years, but incumbents didn't see a new dime. Instead, their revenues dropped by $3.3 billion, or by 5% on average. The bottom line of all of these facts and figures, the Clinton-era framework that has led to much more competition in the business broadband market has been a success more than ever before. Incumbents have lost significant market share to entrants. Special access customers are on the leading edge of the IP transition as they choose faster, more reliable IP-based services over slower, fading technologies. This is ultimately a good thing for every individual consumer, whether you're buying a wireless service plan or a cup of coffee. But in the world of the Looking Glass, everything is backward. Incumbents are losing customers and revenues every year, and so they must have anti-competitive market power. The competitive supply of unregulated Ethernet services is taking off, and so those and other next-generation services must now be regulated. The notice claims competition is best, but then proposes to reset incumbents' prices below competitive levels. And despite the chairman's repeated promises over the last 16 months that ex-ante broadband rate regulation was off the table, the notice serves new ex-ante rate regulation as the main course. In short, after almost 2 decades of success with the Clinton administration's deregulatory policies, the notice concludes that it is time for a new start. Perhaps most nonsensical of all is the treatment of new entrants in the enterprise data services market. Recall the poem of the Walrus and the Carpenter, which Tweedledee recited to Alice. And in that poem, a walrus and a carpenter invite a seabed of oysters to walk with them along the beach. Although the oldest oyster refuses, the younger ones rush to the shore, only to be eaten by their hosts a short while later. So too, here. Over the last several years, the FCC has implored cable operators to upgrade their network and to compete for enterprise customers. And many cable operators obliged, investing billions of dollars in new fiber facilities and technologies, like Ethernet over hybrid fiber coaxial cables. And they successfully competed for new contracts every year at a rapid clip. But now, what's the reward for taking those risks, for entering those markets? How does the agency treat those new entrants who accepted our invitation? By regulating them in the apparently au courant style of Ma Bell. As the oysters cried in the poem, what a dismal thing to do. Our goal should be ubiquitous competition, not universal rate regulation. Our guide should be the data, wherever it leads us, not an ideological drive to regulate. Our focus should be on furthering the public interest in next-generation broadband deployment for all, not advancing the private interests of particular competitors. And our framework should be the one that promotes competitive entry, not one that punishes it. Just as in 2012, I cannot support the notice's sentence first, verdict afterward approach, and I accordingly dissent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You missed the I Am a Walrus reference. Where's the Beatles in this?
Next time. Saving it for later.
Jeez. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Call it what you want. It will always be special access to me. The Commission, industry, and Congress have been grappling with special access for more than a decade. A fact well known to me as I have worked on this issue for more than most and have dealt with various permutations over the years. In all candor, I am somewhat sympathetic to the argument that a previous commission went too far in one direction. However, that does not mean that the commission should swing to the opposite side of the pendulum, casting aside logic, precedent, and basic economic principles in a quest to check off another special interest box by the end of the year. If there is anything that all stakeholders in this proceeding can agree, it is that getting the special access regulation wrong could cause significant harm to the marketplace, and a lot of proposals in this item would qualify as wrong. Undeterred by the prospect of distorting competition and investment incentives, the Commission puts forth a brand new plan, seemingly with the mindset that it's so crazy it might work. It won't. This is plain old-fashioned rate regulation, repackaged with a new narrative. One of the best ways to ensure that providers invest to meet the growing demand for backhaul is to free them from legacy rules that hamstring competition. We cannot regulate our way to deployment. The Commission begins by abrogating specific terms and conditions in incumbent LECs pricing plans. I am not surprised given this Commission's propensity to meddle with contracts, from declaring that certain terms of service violate the Telephone Consumer Protection Act to eliminating joint sales agreements. This latest intervention is unwarranted as well. The provisions are clear, and purchasers entered into them with full knowledge of the consequences for not fulfilling the terms of the deal. Additionally, purchasers had the option to buy services without these terms. They would not have received the corresponding benefits, more flexibility, or deeper discounts, but that was their choice to make. Furthermore, these are agreements between sophisticated and well-represented buyers and sellers. Those purchasers, in turn, serve some of the largest banks, healthcare providers, and big box realtors in the country. It is hard to see the need to intervene in contractual disputes on behalf of some of the major companies represented here, and I'm surprised that it is the position of the Commission majority. At the same time, politicians are vilifying our nation's bankers, especially big banks, which own tens of thousands of ATMs nationwide. The Commission seems intent on using regulatory process to lower these companies' cost of operations. Oh, the irony. It is more vexing that the Commission determines these provisions to be unlawful on their face without having made any determinations about how common these provisions are across providers, whether there is competition in a given market, and what impact that should have on the analysis. In places where there is competition, one would think that substantially reduce the need to scrutinize ILEC's contract provisions, as purchasers could select amongst the providers and choose the most favorable rate, terms, and conditions, along the lines of the competition slogan. Notably, It is in the very next section. The further notice proclaims that the Commission seeks to enter a new era where regulatory determinations are made based on whether a market is competitive. It asks whether to apply the order's requirements to other offerings in non-competitive markets, acknowledging that competition should be relevant to the lawfulness of these provisions. Yet somehow, these ILEC provisions are stuck in the old era. Any subsequent determinations will come too late to impact ILEC terms that have been declared unlawful. So much for technology-neutral framework. Moreover, in unwinding these terms, the Commission is giving one side an undue advantage after the fact. The order determines that early termination and shortfall penalties, common in many parts of the economy, including the housing industry, where most people cannot just pay off their mortgage whenever they desire without a prepayment penalty, cannot exceed the amount the customer would have paid otherwise. The agency views any amounts in excess of such expectation damages to be punitive and a windfall to the incumbents, as if they are ill-gotten gains rather than mutually agreed upon payments. The Commission seeks to avoid penalties that are so extravagant as to show that competition was not the object aimed at, or as to imply fraud, mistake, circumvention, or oppression. However, prohibiting any amount that is more than a carrier's opportunity cost arbitrarily forecloses reasonable penalties above that amount that are neither excessive nor coercive, and the parties freely agreed to as part of the deal. That is the very definition of penalty, designed to act as a legal and reasonable financial deterrent, not just to make a provider financially whole. With respect to the so-called all-or-nothing provisions, the concern seems to be that they might constrain purchasers that did not adequately plan ahead for the possibility of falling demand or switching providers. Those purchasers could have selected different plans that might have provided them more flexibility at the end of the term, but instead, they made certain commitments in exchange for flexibility during the contract period. ILECs put evidence in the record that many customers did not use these plans, and that those that did were able to move to circuits and change their commitment levels. Nonetheless, the Commission rejects one provider's evidence in a footnote before proceeding to seek comment on how to unwind these provisions. It is unclear how ILECs that already made good on their obligation to provide circuit portability will receive the benefit of the bargain if customers are able to remove circuits of their choosing and without incurring the specified shortfall or early termination penalties. Given how the Commission is handling the penalty provisions, I have no confidence that the outcome will be fair or reasonable. Not content to stop there, in the further notice, the Commission proposes a brand new scheme to rate regulate anyone who provides enterprise-level broadband service. I cannot stress how radical a departure this is from history and precedent. For years, Special Access has focused on regulating ILEC's provision of DSN services through the dominant carrier safeguards of tariffing and rate regulation. Over time, as competition developed, price cap carriers received certain relief, including pricing flexibility and even forbearance from many of the dominant carrier safeguards for enterprise broadband service. Meanwhile, consistent with Commission precedent dating back to 1980 and embodied in the 96 Act, facilities-based competitors have been largely unregulated, in part to encourage entry and promote competition. As the further notice rightly points out, the great entry success story has been that of cable. Now, the Commission would roll back the relief for price cap carriers, despite plenty of evidence already in the record that pricing flexibility was not only warranted, but insufficient, and that the enterprise forbearance led to more competition and lower Ethernet prices. And it attempts to do so despite the fact that forbearance cannot be reversed and the services cannot be re-regulated simply by changing their name. Moreover, all of this is premised on the notion that markets that have not been yet defined are not competitive. This may be labeled a further notice, but it seems pretty clear that the outcome is predetermined. As a preview of things to come, this final version has significantly walked back earlier suggestions that markets could be defined in a rational way, and that at least some could be found to be competitive. At the same time, that the Commission's new mantra is to streamline regulation of ILECs, who were bestowed certain benefits by the government in the past. It plans instead to regulate every provider, even new entrants. In particular, the Commission would expand the universe of regulated providers to include cable companies, new competitors that already risked capital to deploy service without any warning that they might be rewarded for the success with restrictions on how they price and market their products. With the incumbents already having received forbearance for many packet-based services, there would have been no reason to think that their own comparable services would ever be subject to that type of regulation. Indeed, the Commission does not have the authority to do so, and labeling it a technology-neutral approach cannot solve that threshold problem. What possible incentive would a cable provider have to pursue an aggressive business broadband deployment strategy only to get regulated coming and going by the Commission? Just awful. In other words, the agency has a lot of explaining to do. I will reserve the bulk of my critiques until it has time to do so. However, I do want to highlight a few additional points and inconsistencies in the meantime. First, I want to call attention to the fact that the principles of competitive or technological neutrality does not mean what you and I might think it does. Instead, it has devolved into whatever the Commission wants it to in a given term. In universal service, the Commission has defined it as a prohibition on treating competitors differently in unfair ways, and it has used this interpretation to justify rules that are actually favor providers of certain technologies over others. Here, the Commission says it wants to treat all technologies the same, so it invokes the principle to justify regulating new providers regardless of whether they would be fair. But even here, it is not actually neutrality, because TDM-based services would continue to be regulated under the price cap system, while the packet-based services will be falling under a benchmark regime. Second, I have been struck by the lack of consistency when it comes to measurements of inflation and productivity at the Commission. This further notice proposes to continue to use the Bureau of Economic Analysis Chain-Weighted Gross Domestic Product Index, or GDP-PI, and reset the X factor using one of several methods proposed in the item. Yet in other items, the Commission uses totally different inflation standards. Perhaps there is some justification that escapes me for different measures for different rules, but the Commission should at least explain its rationale. Instead, it appears that the Commission shockingly chooses the measures that best fit the desired outcome, even if it means approving the use of chain weighting, something that Democrats have strongly opposed in other contexts. Whether the selected measure makes sense from an economic standpoint seems to be secondary consideration at best. For all of these reasons, I dissent.
You know, there's been talk about the plan, it's this nefarious plan that is proposed here. Let's just talk about what the plan is. It's a level playing field, and it's judging things on competition and the degree of competition. That's what's proposed. And then we ask a lot of questions about that. I'm interested that my colleagues who have opposed this item have spoken eloquently in the past about the importance of world leadership for this country in 5G and how that means not just spectrum but infrastructure. What we're talking about here is the infrastructure that will connect 5G, that will connect all wireless carriers, as Commissioner Clyburn talked about the importance of backhaul. That backhaul is a business data service. There is a reason, why all the major wireless carriers, save one, support this item. Because it's essential to wireless competition. Competition today, and 5G innovation and competition tomorrow. And the amazing thing is that what we're principally doing in this item is saying level playing field, use competition as a measurement. We got a lot of questions about that. Suddenly asking questions is opens the floodgate for all kinds of allegedly nefarious activities. The Commission hasn't touched this issue for years and years. And apparently some believe that that inaction should be permanent. But as I said, this is about competition. This is about consumers. This is about winning the 5G future. And so I'm going to cast my vote today in favor of competition, in favor of consumers, and in favor of winning the 5G future. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the exception noted, and the item is adopted. Thank you to all of you. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the final item on your agenda today will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and the Office of Engineering and Technology, and is entitled Amendment of the Commission's Rules with Regard to Commercial Operations in the 3550 to 3650 megahertz band. John Wilkins, Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, will give the introduction, joined by Julie Knapp, Chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology.
Mr. Wilkins, is this your rookie appearance as Bureau Chief?
I believe it is, sir.
Never seen you at this table before, however.
Front and center.
You might want to turn your sign around because none of us know who you are and we're looking at a blank page. Fire away.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce the 3.5 gigahertz order on reconsideration and second report in order. This item reaffirms the Commission's prior decision to create a new, innovative regulatory framework that makes 150 megahertz of spectrum available for a variety of uses, including wireless broadband, and puts in place final rules for this new service. Looking forward, our staff team will be turning to reviewing forthcoming applications to be filed by prospective spectrum access system administrators and environmental sensing capability operators, as well as to crafting upcoming auction procedures for this important band. I'm joined at the table by Julie Knapp, Chief of Office of Engineering and Technology, Brian Regan, Associate Chief in the Wireless Bureau, Bob Pavlak, Senior Engineer from OET, and Becky Schwartz and Paul Powell, Attorney Advisors in the Mobility Division of the Wireless Bureau. And in addition to this team, I want to thank the staff from the Wireless Bureau, OET, the International Bureau, Office of General Counsel, for the significant work, thoughtful contributions to this item, and in particular our cross-bureau engineering team, including Chris Helzer, Bob Nelson, Naveed Golshahi, Kamran Etemad, Jose Albuquerque, and Chip Fleming for their hard work and deep thinking in the development of this important item. And Paul Powell will present the item.
Thanks, John. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
This draft order on reconsideration and second report in order addresses issues raised in several petitions for reconsideration and finalizes the regulatory framework governing the Citizens Broadband Radio Service in the 3550 to 3700 megahertz or 3.5 gigahertz band. The Citizens Broadband Radio Service was originally described in a notice of proposed rulemaking adopted in December of 2012. Subsequently, the Commission held 2 workshops on technical issues related to the proceeding and adopted a Commission-level public notice on licensing issues and a further notice of proposed rulemaking to supplement the record. In April of 2015, after review of the extensive record generated in response to these releases, the Commission adopted a report and order and second further notice of proposed rulemaking that established service rules for the new Citizens Broadband Radio Service and sought focused comment on 3 discrete outstanding issues. The draft order on reconsideration reaffirms the regulatory approach adopted by the Commission last year and denies several petitions for reconsideration that are inconsistent with the established authorization framework and the Commission's goals for the 3.5 gigahertz band. The order also grants in part several petitions that advocated rule modifications that would facilitate more equitable and efficient use of the band. These rule modifications include increasing the maximum permissible power for non-rural Category B base stations, adopting a more flexible approach to measuring out-of-band emissions, extending the time frame for spectrum access systems to respond to interference reports from an associated environmental sensing capability, requiring spectrum access system administrators to adopt procedures to promptly address reports of interference from fixed satellite service earth station licensees, and adopting a minor modification to the rules governing assignment of priority access licenses that would allow a single license to be issued in rural areas when an auction is not triggered. The second report and order also addresses the three issues that the Commission sought comment on in the second further notice of proposed rulemaking. These issues are how to define use of priority access license areas, how to implement and promote a robust secondary market in the band, and how to optimize protections for licensed in-band and out-of-band fixed satellite service earth stations. On the first issue, the draft order would establish a two-pronged approach to determining use by priority access licensees. First, priority access licensees may report their protection areas on the basis of their actual network deployments. Second, to establish an objective maximum protection area, Spectrum Access Systems will use a consistent model to define a default protection contour that will be consistent among all authorized Spectrum Access Systems. This approach will allow priority access licensees the flexibility to tailor their interference protections to their own network deployments, while allowing Spectrum Access System administrators to provide objective, consistent protection to priority access licensees and facilitate general authorized access use of the band. With regard to secondary markets, the draft order would allow spectrum leasing and establish a light touch leasing regime that would allow priority access licensees to leverage the secondary market to provide access to any qualified lessee with minimal administrative requirements or transaction costs. Finally, the draft order would establish protection criteria for grandfathered in-band fixed satellite service earth stations and a small subset of out-of-band fixed satellite service earth stations used for telemetry, tracking, and control operations. These protection criteria would be enforced by the Spectrum Access Systems and optimized based on the characteristics of fixed satellite service earth stations, the terrain, nearby citizens' broadband radio service deployments, and other factors. This approach will provide fixed satellite service licensees with reliable protection while enabling widespread deployment of new services in the band and promoting efficient spectrum use. The staff recommends that the Commission adopt this order on reconsideration and second report and order and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. This will be a recognition, or this is a tribute to Commissioner Pai. You'll never hear that again.
Yeah. That's why I'm so shocked.
In the 1989 film Back to the Future Part 2.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
There were many predictions of what life in the second decade of the 21st century would look like. There were hoverboards and drones, mobile payment technology, and flying cars. So while clearly they did not get everything right, the writers correctly foretold the importance of spectrum, as well as our reliance on wireless technologies. Spectrum is critical to the continued growth and innovation in nearly every segment of our society. It is an essential tool for connecting communities. From that entrepreneur in Manning, South Carolina, who is now able to market and sell her goods globally from a town with a population of less than 4,100, to that college-bound high school student who can now take advanced online courses that are not offered in his inner-city neighborhood high school, it is clear that access to adequate spectrum has the power to exponentially maximize our collective potential. With global data traffic expected to increase nearly eightfold between 2015 and 2020, it is imperative that we find creative and flexible ways to maximize this valuable and finite resource so that we may continue to unleash the possibilities of tomorrow. Our action today will better enable us to do just that. The new Citizens Broadband Radio Service is a unique spectrum sharing regime that will, in a word, revolutionize the way we do things. It establishes a three-tier framework for making the entirety of the 3.5 gigahertz band available for shared commercial use while putting in place protections for the band's incumbents. With Spectrum Access Systems taking on the complicated and vital role of frequency coordination in the three tiers: incumbent access users, priority access licensees, and general authorized access users will soon be able to cohabitate in the band and maximize spectrum efficiency. To be sure, There are parts of this novel regime that some parties wish were different. I understand that, and I hear you loud and clear. But what we must all realize is that in order for us to deliver on the promise of unlocking much-needed additional spectrum, we need to embrace unconventional approaches that challenge and, yes, sometimes upend the way we have done things in the past. We should not be so quick to predict failure, simply because the tools are new and the terrain is changing. The possibilities are limitless, our talents are extraordinary, and the time is now to be bold and visionary. I want to thank the staffs of the Wireless Bureau, the Office of Engineering and Technology, and the International Bureau, and all others for their dedicated and tireless contributions throughout this proceeding. I know I am not alone when I say that I eagerly await the cutting-edge innovations that will inure to our collective benefit because of your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Welcome to the future of spectrum policy. It's happening right here and now with the 3.5 gigahertz band. And to understand why, you need to roll back to the spectrum policy that has come before. There was a time, not that long ago, when wireless bands for mobile use were strictly licensed or unlicensed. One or the other, pick one, no in between. But as the demands on our airwaves have grown, we see new strain on this old binary model. So enter the 3.5 gigahertz band. More than 5 years ago, our friends at NTIA identified the 3.5 gigahertz band as suitable for shared use between government and commercial interests. And as long that was true, as long as existing incumbents, including the Department of Defense and fixed satellite services, well, as long as they were offered protection. And the response to this proposal was a collective shrug. Enthusiasm for this band and its possibilities was hard to find. But what a difference a few years makes. That's because the Commission decided to take this band and experiment. We put in place a multi-tiered approach to spectrum access that is creative, efficient, and forward-looking. Its system of tiered access simultaneously protects existing users, creates new licensed possibilities, and opens up the remaining spectrum to unlicensed services. This is a whole new way of making efficient use of our airwaves. It is a blueprint for the future of spectrum policy. Plus, with this multi-tiered approach, we finally ditch the tired notion that we face a choice between licensed and unlicensed services. This is a good thing. That's because the next generation of wireless devices and coming Internet of Things will not rely on a single spectrum band to function. Instead, services will overcome spectral and physical challenges by moving from frequency to frequency, sometimes on spectrum that is licensed, and sometimes on spectrum that is unlicensed. That is why our experiment in this band is so important. And today, we refine our multi-tiered network and framework. In particular, we increase opportunities for licenses in rural areas. We also increase power levels in this band for licensed and unlicensed services in non-rural areas. In addition, we add flexibility to the measurement of emission limits. And taken together, these adjustments mean new services in this band will have a little more room to operate. Those changes might seem small, but the impact of this band and this approach is bound to be big. So thank you to the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and Office of Engineering and Technology for their continuing efforts to develop, refine, and put in place the future of spectrum policy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well put. Commissioner Pai.
The 3.5 gigahertz proceeding is an experiment. Federal users occupy much of the band, and even though they make little use of the spectrum across large parts of the country, their operations have prevented others from utilizing it. So for years, the FCC has been working to find creative ways to let consumers use this spectrum. After all, to borrow from Dr. Emmett Brown in Back to the Future 1, and building on Commissioner Clyburn's generous reference, where the communications marketplace is going, we don't need roads. The FCC would like to test a theory to see if we can implement a sharing regime that will allow a mix of innovative offerings to flourish. Have we struck the right balance? Will we see a variety of providers and technologies competing in the band? I can't say for sure. It remains to be seen whether we can turn today's spectrum theory into a working reality. Now, for my part, I haven't agreed with every decision that has been made in this proceeding. It's no secret that I've pushed for the FCC to shrink the exclusion zones and to move much more quickly to open them up to consumer use. I've also said that the FCC should be creating greater incentives for providers to invest in this band. Indeed, the IEEE 802.11 working group has expressed little interest in developing a technical standard for this band because of these issues. But notwithstanding my concerns, I appreciate that we have made incremental progress over the course of this proceeding. For instance, we earlier eliminated the 20 megahertz spectrum set-aside for favored groups. We extended the initial license terms. We found a way to ensure that wireless internet service providers can continue to deploy broadband to rural consumers, rather than freezing them out during the transition to a new 3.5 gigahertz regime. And we adopted a mechanism that will allow more licenses to be issued. Today's decision marks yet more progress. One benefit I'd like to focus on in particular involves rural Americans. Under our prior 3.5 gigahertz order, consumers in rural areas would not have been able to obtain any service that required quality of service assurance, including broadband, if only one provider was willing to serve them. Why? Because our rules limited priority access licenses, the only ones that include interference protection, to areas where multiple providers sought them. Having grown up in rural Kansas and having visited many rural communities during my time at the Commission, I can tell you that it's often difficult enough to get interest from one provider, let alone two. And so I made a proposal to my colleagues, and we were able to get a deal done. We'll now be making a priority access license available in rural areas, even when there's only one provider that seeks to obtain it. This should provide a greater incentive for wireless internet service providers and others to bring a mix of technologies to rural America. I thank my colleagues for agreeing to this idea and will be voting to approve in part and concur in part. And I thank the FCC staff, in particular Paul Powell, for their great work on this item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Pai, and thank you for your efforts on the rural front.
Thanks.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 3.5 gigahertz experiment has been touted as a potential new approach to spectrum allocation. While I praised opening up this unused spectrum for additional uses, I made clear at the time that the priority access licensing scheme was problematic and needed to be fixed. The 3.5 gigahertz framework is based on a three-tiered hierarchy for spectrum access. For this grand experiment to work, however, all three prongs need to be fully functional. Sadly, the Commission refuses to fix the PALS assignment mechanism, which is fundamentally flawed and undoes years of successful spectrum auction policy. Specifically, PALS should be available in any census tract, even if there's only one interested entity in priority access. Not only does the record on reconsideration support this, but throughout this proceeding, many smaller wireless providers and entrepreneurs, including those in rural America, have told me that they seek priority and interference protection for their particular business plans. Further, many have stated that the certainty provided by a PAL is necessary to secure the funding needed to develop and deploy offerings in this band. I've also spoken to many GAA proponents who are also supportive of providing PALs in any market in which they are sought, so long as the process does not preclude GAA use, which it does not. The arguments put forth against resolving this issue are not compelling. For example, some at the Commission have decided that the statute prevents addressing this issue because there is no mutual exclusivity. However, a PAL by its very nature is mutually exclusive to GAA use because these license types cannot coexist in the same frequencies. At this point, is consistent with our decision in the incentive auction order that only one application for a license is sufficient to meet our mutually exclusive rules. Moreover, even if there is mutually exclusive for the first auction, there is no guarantee that it will exist in future auctions. Therefore, an entity that invests in and constructs a network based on priority access may not be even able to participate in future auction to maintain its status. this could result in stranded investment. Industry participants have made clear that they want fully functioning licenses that this sharing model was supposed to offer. An equally disturbing problem with the current structure and subject to numerous petitions in this item is the lack of renewability and short license terms for PALs. It's been made clear by numerous wireless providers that the short license terms and lack of renewal, along with the auction structure, will inform their business decisions, whether they are willing to apply for PALs and whether there's even a business worth investing and developing this band. The fact that the Commission staff would not even entertain discussions on changing the lack of renewability and licensing term is so telling about how this Commission is run and the unwillingness to listen to worthwhile ideas. Fundamentally, such a decision undoes decades of successful auction policy by the Commission. For example, the Commission has touted internationally the need for longer license terms and renewability as prerequisites for successful spectrum auction and widespread wireless deployment. In fact, this exact subject was raised by a number of representatives of foreign nations during my visit to the ITU plenipotentiary in 2014. But such a policy misses an important concept relevant today. There will be a lack of interest in spectrum licenses up front if there's no predictability and certainty regarding investments made by those seeking the licenses. And I want to make it clear, to the extent that the people suggest that this unproven and flawed experiment should be replicated in other spectrum bands, such as millimeter wave frequencies, that is a proposition that I will not support. I'm also unable to support some of the delegations in this item. In conclusion, although the compromise offer was put on the table by the chairman to allow one free PAL when there was no mutual exclusivity, that did not fix the problem and just wasn't enough to excuse all the other flaws in the licensing process. Basically, by rejecting common sense and generally supported changes to this experiment, we have created a tier of licenses where there may be little to no incentive to participate. As it stands now, the band plan for 3.5 gigahertz is like a three-legged stool that could topple over because one key component is missing. Therefore, I must dissent on the two portions already discussed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. I have a statement for the record, and we'll stick with that. I do want to thank all the hard work of all the folks in OET and the Wireless Bureau throughout the entire course of what seems to have been a never-ending proceeding that now is actually coming to an end. Thank you for all of your activities in that regard. So I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The item is adopted. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted. Anybody have anything to add? Yes, ma'am.
Right quickly, I wanted to acknowledge that this is a special day around the globe. Today is International Girls in ICT Day, which is an annual effort to encourage and empower girls and young women to study and pursue careers in ICT, or information and communications technology. What I'm happy to report is that when you talk to the younger girls, they are interested and excited about STEM, or STEAM. Some people have expanded it to be, and so that's a great thing. But we still have a lot of years to make up for when we talk about the best and the brightest talent being immersed in these fields. So I'm happy to acknowledge not only the benefits and how novel this day is, and hopefully that all of us will take note, but that your own International Bureau, Mr. Chairman, has walked outside of these walls and spoke to a group at the Washington School for Girls, a group of middle-aged students, all girls in Southeast D.C., to really reinforce, the value and demystify what these fields are. And I think to me, that's the biggest barrier. So there's still more room, for those, if I'm allowed to say that, Mr. Chairman. It is important when we talk about our fields, which we're so excited about, that everyone feels welcome and invited and will contribute their best, their talents to the field of ICT. So I just want to acknowledge that today is a special day internationally and that we all have a role in it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosewarson?
Thank you. Today, sadly, marks the departure of Marquita Abitong from my office. Now, Marquita has been, you can stand up. We can embarrass you. Just a slight wave. There we go. Marquita's probably a familiar face from around here. She has spent almost a decade and a half at the agency, including tours of duty in the Office of Media Relations and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. She's also been the face you first see when you come into my office since early in my tenure. She has kept our meetings moving, our travel in check, no mean feat, and she has kept the proverbial trains running on time for a long time. A lot has happened on her watch, not just professionally but personally. She has gotten married, and she has also had her first child, her son Mason, who is full-on adorable. And in light of all those changes, she will be moving on, and we are going to miss her terribly, but I want to make sure that everyone knows what a gem Marquita has been, not just in my office, but for this agency, and we wish her well.
Hear, hear.
I just wanted to briefly mention that our interns have departed. They're not here, so I'll just keep it brief. But Bernie Archbold, Brandon Carter, Stephen Schumacher, and Max Staloff were fantastic this semester. We're certainly going to miss them, wish them well during their finals and thereafter. I also want to recognize Bob Summers, who was a former International Bureau employee at the FCC. He spent over 31 years in federal service. As his farewell email from somebody else put it, Bob welcomed the world to the FCC, and that's because he helped run the International Visitors Program. And that is something that I certainly took advantage of. I remember very fondly, for example, meeting virtually all of the regulatory officials involved in the communications space from Nigeria. And it was just a terrific meeting, and I can only imagine all the great friendships and relationships that Bob helped usher into being by virtue of his stewardship of the program. So I certainly wish him well, thank him for his service to the Commission, and hope he will indulge, as was put in the farewell email, his love of history, travel and tourism, dogs, and Belgian chocolates. All good pursuits.
And he's a history buff, and he's going to, and he's a licensed tour guide for D.C., where he puts that history to work. And so what's he going to be doing? We can go out and get him when we got our tourists coming to town to visit us. Bob can take us around, and we won't have to make things up anymore.
Sounds
Works
like
for
you
me.
have a future, Mr. Chairman. No comment from me.
We should also note that there are a lot of young faces around the commission today, and we've been some in and out of the commission meeting today. But as we have been celebrating Bring Your Child to Work, so everybody can see the important work that moms and dads are doing here. So we're glad you're here. I'm going to celebrate this day this afternoon by going off to where my 39-year-old daughter works, and she's taking her father to work today. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? Madam Secretary, tell us what happens next.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Wednesday, May 25th, 2016.
Until that date, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the press conference and turn it over to Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you, Kim. Today's meeting was a classic example of how the Commission routinely deals with issues that are complex and yet highly, highly consequential. Mention special access, business data services, 3.5 gig or RTT to the typical American, and you get confused looks and their eyes begin to glaze over. I actually was looking over at some of you during the meeting and saw a similar reaction. But the ideas that we just approved will affect what the consumer pays for pretty much everything, because pretty much everything uses telecom. The things that we did will pave the way for next generation 5G wireless networks, which, as you know, we are in an international competition on to determine where the jobs and opportunity future will lie. And they will unleash significant amounts of spectrum to meet the seemingly insatiable demand for new wireless services. And we cannot underestimate what we did with the real-time text item today. Millions of Americans who are deaf, hard of hearing, speech disabled, deaf, blind, now have an opportunity to communicate in real time over IP networks. And if I've said it once, I said it 100 times. That the challenge that we have, the responsibility that we have, is to make sure that we harness IP, this unique opportunity, this unique point in time that we have, to harness IP to attack the challenges that have affected many and have not had technical solutions until this point. Today we took a big step forward on that. So again, I want to thank I see the staff sitting around here, the remarkable staff that has delivered on these kinds of things, and be happy to respond to anything you all want to talk about. Where should we start?
Paul Kirby with TR Daily. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pai mentioned that the RTT item talks about the benefits of RTT over SMS. Would you support extending the rules for your text to 911 so to require them to be real-time text as opposed to SMS, or is that a technology choice that you all
No, I think that what
want?
we're doing is we're setting up a situation that allows that to evolve. I mean, I obviously disagreed with what he was saying. I mean, what you do is you deal with the capabilities that exist at that point in time. And I think that RTT creates a great new opportunity for us, including on 911. Elena. Lydia, I'm
Bayud.
sorry, Jesus.
That's okay. Lydia
Sorry.
Bayud, Bloomberg BNA. Mr. Chairman, what is your reaction to a bill that passed the House Energy and Commerce Committee this morning? It's HR 2592. It would require the FCC to publish items at least 21 days before a vote or within 24 hours of circulation.
So, I've been asked about that by that committee previously. I thought that Congresswoman Eshoo did a pretty good explanation of what it meant. She said something like, it's the Lobbyists Come On Down Act. Because, that's what the result is here, that you publish something, and if you're going to follow the rules and procedures that we have here, you publish something, you get input, then you have to revise on that input, then you have to publish it, then you get input, then you revise based on that input, then you publish something, then you get input, then it becomes a hamster wheel of endless racing around, leading nowhere. And except for, as Congresswoman Eshoo discussed, for a great opportunity for the lobbyists to invade the commission and send bills to their clients. Lynn.
History has shown that it's likely
I don't believe in history.
There'll be a new chairman next year, early next year. Given the amount of time left then in your presumed tenure, how much more can you keep rolling out new items.
I read a really thoughtful piece in Com Daily this morning. I don't know whether you've seen it or not.
We don't read that.
Yeah.
And really, no one
well,
should.
I couldn't.
So.
TR didn't arrive. Do you want to explain that? Huh?
We didn't really write much. Well, good yesterday, so we didn't miss
So,
much.
hey, you know.
Apparently, there was an email server problem, but.
So look, Lynn, we're going to run through the tape here. That's our goal. Todd Shields.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. To what extent have you upended expectations about your tenure, given that some people were saying, oh, he's a cable guy, we can't trust him with this post? What do you think of that whole ball of wax?
The lawyers say res ipsa. The facts speak for themselves. I don't think that I've changed. I think I'm the same guy that I was when I was heading NCTA. As a matter of fact, I had Michael Powell was kind enough early on in my tenure to ask me to come over and meet with the NCTA board. Their digs are a lot nicer than when I was running the joint, and I did, and I told them, I said, I think a lot of what my regulatory belief is, I learned while I was at NCTA representing people who were bringing new competition and new innovation to the marketplace and saw the important role that public policy plays in ensuring that there are opportunities for those who want to bring competition and those who want to bring innovation. And I don't think my position's changed since then.
In support of innovation is what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Dave.
Mr. Chairman, can you talk about the delay or what led to the final approval of the Charter, Bright House, Time Warner deals? And do you think by including with the stringent conditions, does this set a precedent for other potential approvals? And what message does it set to the rest of the market, especially competitors that don't have the same stringent conditions that Charter, Time Warner will?
Wow, 3 questions in one. Well done. So first of all, we were working very closely with the Department of Justice, and our timetables were closely coordinated. We were working with each other, and so that's kind of the answer to the time. In terms of the conditions, I think what we did was we created a 7-year innovation and competition zone that, in terms of broadband access, says that there will be during this period an open opportunity for those, to Todd's point, who are innovative and competitive, to have an opportunity to bring new competition and new services. And I think that we look, to your third point, I think we look at every issue. I know we look at every issue on a case-by-case basis, and I don't think that you can say, well, because of this, then that means this about all others.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you want a technologically neutral framework for special agribusiness data services, and you want to be a level playing field. Cable is obviously concerned that they could get regulated on this. Can you tell us how they might be regulated under this, and why would you regulate a new entrant?
They've been offering telecommunication services for some time. The offering of those telecommunication services has been regulated as a telecommunications service for some time. I think the first question becomes, you go back to, so you got to, we'll go back to Todd's question. When I was running NCTA, the mantra was level playing field, level playing field, level playing field. So here's a level playing field that says everybody who offers a telecommunications service gets regulated in the same way. Oh no, we don't like that playing field. And so I think the point here is the first question that anybody ought to ask is the competition question, because regulation will flow out of the degree of competition. And that only makes sense. But in competitive environments, the regulation is going to be light or non-existent. So what's the deal?
I just realized we have 4 Davids in a row.
Wow, this is my David Day.
This is David number 2, David Hatch, Policy and Regulatory Report. Chairman, what are the FCC's options if the appeals court invalidates all or part of the net neutrality rules?
David, I mean, have you got another hypothetical you'd like to ask? I mean, come on. Let's see what the court does. I'm confident in our position. I think John Sallet did a great job arguing it before the court, and we'll deal with whatever the court hands down. David.
Yeah, David McCabe from the Hill. I can also do McCabe today because this is a growing problem. I'm wondering, a couple trade groups have asked the Commission to extend the comment deadline for the privacy item. They say there's too much going on, too many contentious items. The smaller groups won't have time to comment on everything adequately. And I'm wondering what you think of that idea.
You know, it's not exactly a surprise. You may recall that during the open internet debate, everybody kept saying, and this means privacy is going to be an issue. This means that the FTC won't have authority over privacy. The FCC. I mean, my goodness, that was over a year ago. I mean, you know, this issue has been in the public debate for well over a year. And I think that we have provided meaningful time for comments and reply comments to bring that debate to a point of closure.
John? My middle name's actually David. So
there you go, JD.
That's right. So I guess I wanted you talked earlier about sort of the unique opportunity that you have right now to attack the challenges faced by people who have special challenges of their own. Can you look ahead to the rest of the year and beyond? What further steps, what further actions do you hope to achieve?
So obviously we got to finish what we started today. This was the beginning. This was the notice. And in everything we're doing, we're asking this question. I'm looking forward to rolling out a new service that we'll talk about more later, that will offer new capabilities for individuals who are hard of hearing or deaf, and how that updates the kind of services that we've been supporting for a long time through our Telecommunications Relay Service Fund. There was a significant message that I was trying to send when on my first week in office, I sat down with representatives from all the groups who do business here, but the first group, and I stipulated that they are the first group. The first group were the individuals, were the organizations representing individuals with disabilities. We have had a broad initiative on issues regarding individuals with disabilities, from the kind of services that are available to their hiring. And we've got an initiative here, for instance, to reach out and make sure that we are hiring individuals with intellectual disabilities and providing opportunities for them. The fact that this was the first group I met with means that we're going to be dealing with these issues in an aggressive and creative way till the last day I'm here. Alex.
Cool. No David here. Alex Byers with Politico.
Geez,
Always screwing things up. I want to ask about the set-top box proceeding. You have a large chunk of congressional Democrats that have asked you to pause the proceeding. You have some new innovations from the industry that may not be perfect, but at least move the ball forward from what we've seen over the last 20 years. And like a pretty detailed litigation threat from NCTA. So I'm wondering how, if at all, these or other developments on this thorny issue are affecting or changing your thinking at all.
Yeah, it's good. Wait a minute. Did you say that we might get sued? We've never had that experience before.
Sure.
You know, I think the point you raise about the announcement that Comcast made this week is a really good one and a really important thing, and I think really points the way forward on this whole discussion. I mean, for those of you who may not have seen it, Comcast announced that they were going to put set-top box functionality into Samsung smart TVs and would not be charging a monthly set-top box fee. I think that what Comcast just did by doing that is proving our point that you can take a third-party device, put set-top box functionality into it, and protect copyright, protect the economic ecosystem, not have to rebuild the network, and all these other horrible things that the industry has tracked out. I mean, that's the essence of our proposal, that you can safely move content to a third-party device and not destroy copyright, et cetera, as I said. But the challenge here is that this is for one company's device and one cable company. So if you have proven the concept that you can put set-top box functionality safely into third-party devices, then let's make sure that applies to all cable operators. Let's make sure that it applies to all TVs. Let's make sure that it is an opportunity for anybody who wants to change their set-top box. Because, I mean, so what do you do for another TV? What do you do for someone who can't afford a new TV but would like to quit paying the monthly fees but would rather buy a set-top box? So I'm encouraged by the technological and business solution this represents, and how it is a model and in accord with the kind of things we've been talking about. I'm also mindful of the fact that in 2008, Comcast made a similar proposal called True Two-Way with Sharp, where they were going to be embedded in Sharp. And that in 2010, NCTA came to this agency in another proceeding and proposed something very similar to what we're proposing today. And 99% of consumers still don't have choice.
There's a skepticism that this will really, on their own, they're really going to bring this to like a mass market.
Well, so here's the rub.
Yeah.
So one, I think they have overcome all of you've got to rebuild your network, it's going to destroy copyright, it's going to destroy the economic, excuse me, it's happening over here. Let's take how that's happening, put that into the rules, and make it available for everybody. But there's another issue, too. Literally this morning, I thought that one of you might ask a question about this, and I was online, and I just put into Google Comcast Samsung, and the first thing that came up was a notice from last year that said this, quote, "We have decided to discontinue support of the Xfinity TV on Samsung Smart TV's app as of August 3rd, 2015. So that which Comcast giveth, Comcast can taketh away." So you reach two conclusions. Conclusion number one, set-top box functionality can be put successfully into a third-party device and continue the cable business as we've known, and the copyright protection and the economics, etc. And two, it is essential that this be available to all Americans, regardless of who your cable operator is, regardless of the TV that you use, and that it be available for all time, not until a unilateral decision is made to pull the plug. So what we're doing, as you've heard me say before, is it is the law that there must be competitive choice, and 99% of cable and satellite subscribers don't have competitive choice. What we're proposing is pro-innovation and pro-competition. What we're proposing is going to help consumers save money, and it's got to be done. And that's the road that we're heading down. Would you like to change your name to Dave?
I'd just like to point out that if I had been a boy, my parents planned to name me David. So.
You know.
2 brothers, no Davids in my family. So. Okay, so my question is on special access.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to wade into this. It seems like everybody is disagreeing on whether or not there's competition in the market, to the point that it depends on maybe how far away something is from a building. I'm wondering, in the order, if you are making conclusions about this is how you determine if there's competition in the market. Is that still open? Can you?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have made 2 proposals. The first is that there ought to be this level playing field, the technological neutrality. And the second is that the measuring stick for whether regulation ought to be applied should be competition. And then we asked beaucoup questions about, okay, tell us what you think about how to define those kinds of presumptions that we've made. So the specific answer to your question is we've asked questions to flesh out those issues.
Amir or Curtis, did you guys have a question? Oh, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, it's time for the Bureau press conference. Are there any questions on the real-time text item? Okay, yes, so CGB?
We also have public safety.
And public safety, okay, all right. Lynn?
Yeah, there's something in the press release about requiring RTT to communicate with TTY, and Commissioner Clyburn mentioned something about backward compatibility. Are those the same concepts?
Yes. Okay. So right now, there are still, as I mentioned, TTY use is declining considerably, but there's still a base out there of users, mostly senior citizens, low-income people who can't get access to broadband or live in rural communities or just can't afford access to broadband. So those people are still using TTYs. And what the carriers have determined is that there is a way to achieve compatibility between real-time text and TTYs. So the order asks about, or actually I think it proposes, continue requiring backward compatibility between real-time text and TTY for a period of time, and asks about what that period should be, so that TTY users can talk to real-time text users.
So just to be absolutely clear, so it's not talking about requiring the wireless carriers with IP networks to continue to support the use of TTY on their end of the conversation.
No, it's really more making sure that there's compatibility between the 2 types of transmission services.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any others on this item?
Yep. There was one other thing, and perhaps I misunderstood her, but I thought Commissioner Clyburn said that the item asks about whether to apply RTT requirements in prisons.
She did ask about the application of this particular type of communication feature
for inmate calling services, and that
Okay,
is
so that would be a
actually- that's in the draft.
non-wireless?
The concern is, I don't think that we asked specifically about wireless or wireline. We just asked about whether it would have benefits to allow inmates to use this, because inmates have had a tough time using TTYs. So it was just a very general, a couple of general questions asking about its application for inmates.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Anything further? Okay, so any questions regarding the second item, business data services?
Just a couple.
Yes, okay.
All right.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you, Commissioner Clyburn talked about the 50 megabits per second thing. I guess it's now just seeking comment. There's no type of, as I understand it, tentative conclusion that that would be some sort of dividing line with presumptions above and below about competition or not. Can you give us a sense as to whether you all still have in there some tentative conclusions about the competitive market test or anything else of significance beyond generalities about level playing field and technological neutrality?
So I'm going to parrot the chairman. I read in Com Daily that we don't have any tentative conclusions.
No, that wasn't actually what it said. It said you all may get rid of them or may get rid of some of them. That was quoting one person.
I think it's fair to say that there is, as the chairman has said, there are views on the principles, but mostly questions sought on how to implement those principles.
Regarding figuring out whether there's competition or not, the press release says you'll be looking at material competitive effects, and I'm reading that, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds as though you're not going to look at how many competitors there are, but you're going to look at factors like what, like price, to determine whether or not it's competitive in the first place?
Well, there's a lot of questions about how you determine if a market is competitive or not competitive, and I think as a number of people have said and as noted in the presentation, that's the gating criteria. But you're right that a key question is, well, what is the trigger? And we ask a number of questions about different factors that could be that trigger, and possibly a combination of factors, but we don't have a tentative conclusion that it's this one or that one.
So it's not going to be like HHI, Hirschman, whatever it is?
It's not an HHI test,
Okay.
no.
Thank you.
And again, we're looking to commenters to propose what they think would be the best approach to determine whether a market is competitive or not competitive.
I have a couple questions. For the FMPRM, how frequently have you proposed the question or asked the question to look at market competition? And then in the order, when would those prohibitions on those terms go into effect?
So, sorry, the first question is about the FNPRM, the second one about the tariff investigation order. Okay. And on the first question on the further notice, you were saying how often do we...
How often will you be looking at whether or not a market is competitive? Because markets change. So in the item, what questions do you ask about how frequently that will be measured?
Yes, there's a lot of questions about implementation and recognizing that we want implementation to be predictable and administrable, as I think a number of people mentioned. There is a comment is sought on whether to have a periodic data collection every 3 years, I think might be noted there, and how that would interact with, with updating the results of the competitive market test is something that we do see comment on.
And for the order?
For the order, so those would need, for the terms that need to be changed, that would be within 60 days that the tariffs would be revised.
Can I ask about sort of the interaction between the tariff investigation order and the FNPRM? Because it seems as though if you end up adopting the elimination of tariffs, what effect would that have on saying you've got to change your tariffs? And I mean, does it kind of sort of moot the entire investigation? Or?
I don't think it moots it. So the order, of course, is effective upon release. The other item is a further notice, so it will depend ultimately on any decision the commission makes. But we do see, the item does seek comment about the types of findings that were made in the tariff investigation order, say about excessive early termination fees, should those be applied generally as a rule in the marketplace, and if so, under what circumstances?
And I'm not sure I'm counting correctly. So it's the all or nothing, the early termination fees, and the volume?
Shortfall penalties. Shortfall penalties.
Shortfall is volume, right?
Shortfall, so they have these percentage commitments that are associated
with
volume.
It's a revenue kind of?
Their volume commitments are associated with certain plans. And shortfall, right, so when they drop below their percentage commitments, it's a shortfall, and there's a penalty that's associated with that. That's how it applies.
And so volumes, is that both minutes and dollars, or does it vary?
These tend to be circuits, so like DS1s, DS3s.
Thank you.
You say, they'd have to remove these illegal terms of these tariffs within 60 days of release of the order. When you all were explaining the item on all or nothing, it was said that you would ban this prospectively, but seek comment on how to deal with the existing ones. So do they have to ban it prospectively within 60 days, but you're just going to seek comment on what happens with the existing ones? Is that the difference?
Right. So the tariff gets revised to take out the unlawful provision. The question is, for those all or nothing, is what do you do about the existing agreements that have been entered into? And there are views on both sides about concerns if we were to just simply apply it to the existing agreements. So the question is how to go about that.
Right, the obligations that they're under in their current agreements arise from the application of the all or nothing, so they're in agreements, and so how do you deal with that? How do the parties deal with their circumstances, which were in many ways driven by the existence of those requirements?
I've got one more.
Yeah.
The press release mentions some Verizon services that are exempt from the just and reasonable requirements of the Act. Can you provide some background there? What are you all talking about?
Yes, and there's also, you see those referenced in, for example, the Verizon Encompass letter that was filed, so you might take a look at that. But that refers to the deemed grant that Verizon received in 2006, which, because it was just the way the initial forbearance petition was framed, and since it was a deemed grant, exempted Verizon services entirely from Title II, including 201 and 202. So the goal would really be on the notion of a level playing field, to have everyone subject to at least the basic protections of 201, 202, recognizing, of course, and this sort of goes to another point that I think has come up, recognizing that although everyone's subject to the same legal framework, how you apply that framework, that's one of the key questions asked. So, for example, once you find a market is non-competitive, there are specific questions asked about how you determine who should be subject, say, to the price regulation in that case. So just to clear up any misconception, it is not out there a proposal that anyone in a non-competitive market, everyone in a non-competitive market is subject to price regulation. Broad question is asked, once you find a market is non-competitive, who should it be subject to? For example, should it be based on market share or something else? So that, I just wanted to mention, is an item on which comment is sought as well. I realize that wasn't directly your question, but it's relevant to some other questions we heard. Yes.
And when do you plan on publishing the two items?
We always like to release as soon as we can. This is a large item, and we do have to do, because of business-sensitive material, we have to do some redactions for the public version. Our goal is to get it out as early as tomorrow. I'm not promising we can meet that. It'll depend on a number of factors, but that's what we're aiming for.
Okay. All right. One last one on this one.
Are you all proposing or seeking comment on rate cuts for areas that will continue to be regulated? And is there any range of rate cuts, if so, that you're looking at?
There's comments sought on, and you might be referring in particular to, for example, TDM. So there's comments sought on, and this can get pretty dense pretty quickly, on things like a productivity factor, which the Commission hasn't adjusted since 2005. And there's some substantial economic analysis with algorithms and squigglies that I don't understand, but our chief economist has attempted to explain to me. But that is something that we're definitely seeking comment on.
But there's no proposed.
But no proposed amount or approach. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks.
So finally, the 3.5, questions on 3.5. The Wireless Bureau, come on up. And OET. Paul.
Paul Kirby with TR Daily. I guess the first important question is, do you have any squigglies in your item?
Squigglies. Any algorithms in our item? There's a little bit of math in there, yeah. You might find an equation or two.
Tip your waitresses. So let me just double check. Is it correct that the item would increase the power levels in rural areas, but not non-rural areas, correct?
Paul, do you want to answer that?
The power levels are actually being increased in non-rural areas. The non-rural Category B devices are now being allowed to operate at up to 47 dBm per 10 megahertz, which is the level that was adopted for rural Category B devices in the first order.
Okay. The reason I asked is Commissioner Pai said something about, so then the rural issue that he mentioned involves the mutual exclusivity. Okay. So this exclusion in this order adopted today would say that in a rural area, if you have one applicant, then it can be auctioned. It still would not be auctioned, though, in a non-rural area, correct?
It would say for any census tract in which there's not mutual exclusive applications filed, we would issue one PAL to the applicant.
Just in rural areas?
Just in rural areas, that's right.
Okay. And then are you all... Oh, and then the other thing about power, the item also adjusts the way it's measured, is that correct? Yes. And is that just in non-rural or both? Because it gets confusing.
It's both.
Okay. And then are you hoping to get the item out today or?
That is the goal.
Okay.
Thank you. Today.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Anything further on this one? Okay, thank you. Commissioners Pai and O'Reilly are here.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called the press conference.
Praise the Lord.
You're wearing the purple tie.
Absolutely right.
I'm going to double check. Commissioner Pai, you concurred in part in the 3.5 gigahertz, but what you said generally was positive about what the item today does. Did you concur in part because of your original vote in the original item a year ago? In other words, it kind of carries over because you had some concerns originally?
That's basically right, that there are still some concerns I have about some of the original cuts that were made and that persist, but given some of the improvements I was able to secure, in particular the rural American, the ability for the PAL to be issued in rural America where there's only one provider that wants to participate, that was significant enough, I thought, to merit approval.
If I could just follow up once, Commissioner O'Reilly, in your statement you said, I dissent in these two areas already discussed. I just want to clarify which are those areas.
Sure. So I, at length, went through the two areas. One is the issue of a market, a census tract where only one provider seeks a PAL. The improvements by the Commissioner Pai was able to get are somewhat helpful, but there's more than just that. Because, for example, is the Bureau just outlined that PAL only gets you get one 10 megahertz, and you're actually, it's a real question of how we're going to give it to them versus auctioning it to them, so they're actually getting it for free. So there's some concerns I have about that deal, but even larger is that it's just not in the rural markets where you may have this situation, and we should be able to solve that circumstance under our existing auction structure because there is mutual exclusivity. So I think that's the one part. The second part, which I think is just as problematic, and in both areas you saw the wireless community who are the potential PALs, those people that are seeking the PALs, the one leg of the three-legged stool. they've said, look, I need something on renewability, and the 3 years for license term is not enough. I'm not going to invest in a market and know that I might lose the license that I need to have certainty. I'm not just going to be a GAA, which is, I like unlicensed too, but they're saying we need licenses, and that's what the mechanism is built to do. And so in those scenarios, they're like, I'm not going to invest for something that's only for 3 years, and I may lose it after that time period. So that you need to do something on renewability. The Commission wouldn't even entertain, the Bureau wouldn't even entertain a conversation on the point. And that, to me, is a big problem for this whole structure, because what you're going to end up with is just the federal government users and unlicensed. And I'm fine, if that was the intended goal, but don't pretend that there's 3 legs if you're going to cut one of the legs in half.
Thank you.
Yes, on the RTT item, my understanding, Commissioner Riley, is that you're concerned about imposing new requirements for RTT, but you're okay with eliminating the TTY and not replacing them with anything?
Yes, the TTY is dropping in terms of usage, and its functionality is basically non-existent in modern technology. So I'm comfortable in moving to new technologies and voted for that part. In terms of on the second part is what is RTT and who gets to decide what's the functionality and what does it look like. In that case, the Commission is saying we are going to decide what it's going to look like. We are the arbiters of what the software application is going to look like. And I don't think that's appropriate. That's not the role of the Commission, in my opinion, and I don't want them in that business. RTT may be a wonderful product. It has promise, and I hope it works. But there are already a number of commercial, some of them free, products that many people, including hearing loss people, use today. They're very popular, and we ought to be careful about picking winners and losers. And to me, that's the question of technological mandates, technological neutrality that has been thrown around in other items.
So just to follow up, so you would, what would your ideal outcome be? Just to eliminate the regulatory requirement for TTY and let the underlying statute be in the market between them?
Well, I'd like to see the RTT develop in the marketplace in and of itself. The providers are working on this. They've already made those offers that they're planning to do this, and it's going to take some time to develop and roll out. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but the Commission shouldn't be the one saying this has to do this. We have to not only can it not just be an app, right? It has to be embedded in the phone in some capacity, and if it is an app, it has to be pre-installed. Those things have not been shown to be necessary, and there's no mechanism to say that they actually would be cost efficient, and that applications are already used today that fulfill some of these needs, if not all of them.
And Commissioner Powell, you don't have concerns at all with regarding the mandating of a particular solution in place of TTY?
I mean, I obviously share Commissioner O'Reilly's concerns with respect to the FCC going beyond its statutory mandate and specifying technical standards and micromanaging how these services are rolled out. Given some of the improvements I was able to secure, in addition to the basic conceptual point, which is that 2 years ago, the FCC rejected my view that we should not be doubling down on fading technology. Now we are finally embracing the IP transition as it applies to the deaf and hard of hearing community, and I'm glad to see that view that I advanced 2 years ago has finally been vindicated. And so that was the gist of what I was trying to express this morning.
Yes, but you didn't dissent, right? Or
I did not, correct.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Commissioners, first, can you both say whether you intend to vote in favor of the Charter, Time Warner, Bright House merger? And secondly, can you also respond in general to the conditions that Chairman Wheeler negotiated as part of this about the deal?
I don't comment on pending transactions.
I don't comment on mergers beyond the statement that I've put out and is available on our website, so you can see. I hope that would address any people. I am in the process of reading the document as I do all items, as you all know, and as my statement said, I will vote expeditiously.
David?
Did you all take? Are you all more concerned or less concerned based on whatever changes were made at the last moment in response to Commissioner Clyburn on the special access proceeding?
I depend. The list is long, and as she said, I don't mean that in disrespect. She has said it is long, but certainly I want to be careful here on what I am allowed to talk about in terms of earlier versions, but the changes that she has achieved or to the item, there was a category of above 50 that was going to be deemed competitive that you wouldn't have this structure applied to, and now we're basically throwing it open that this new structure, which I disagree with wholeheartedly, is going to apply to everybody, and that to me seems like the wrong direction.
I'll simply say, in addition to that I was grateful that Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner Rosenworcel shared some of our concerns. Commissioner Clyburn, for example, said that this was highly complicated. Commissioner Rosenworcel mentioned as our first priority that we should prioritize the infrastructure investment that's going to be necessary to supply some of these high-capacity circuits. Unfortunately, I fear that those very practical and wise considerations are going to succumb to an ideological drive to regulate at all costs, and that sort of fact-free enterprise does not bode well for the future of this marketplace.
In fairness, the chairman has said, we just asked some questions, but you all have been around. I mean, this is the same, the question was asked earlier, as I saw, on the privacy item. You ask 500 questions in a privacy item, but you don't plan to give them extra time to answer those questions. This, a number of these items, knowing that the chairman's time is what it is, they're pre-cooked. We know where this item is going. They take out tentative conclusions, but they put the word proposal. So we know where this is going. This is not a fulsome, let me see the comments and then sit back and put our feet up and try and figure out what's the right answer. These are predetermined. This is an exercise in necessity versus thoughtful rulemaking.
Commissioner O'Reilly, could you at least elaborate on the statement regarding charter? If you could elaborate on the statement that you issued that the FCC is acting outside of the merger application and pursuing unrelated policies and...
I think I'm going to let the statement stand for itself, and it says that it appears, is what I think I said in the statement. So I'm going to let that stand for now. You'll have an opportunity to read my statement when I conclude that item.
Any ETA on when you'll conclude the item?
I think I said expeditiously.
The fourth, David. I have two questions on the set-top box. One is, what is your general response to what the chairman just said about how Comcast moves with Samsung and Roku, particularly with Samsung, kind of prove his point that you can port set-top box technology into another device, and your response to that. And then my second is, you're sort of in this odd position where you may have some common interests with some Democrats on the Hill, and I'm wondering if you have reached out to any of those Democrats who are skeptical of the plan, or if you plan to.
Well, thank you for the question. With respect to the set-top box scheme that the FCC has rolled out, I think that it is telling that we are now seeing a groundswell of bipartisan opposition on Capitol Hill and around the country. And I will agree with something that one congressman said in characterizing the chairman's comments to a closed-door meeting of the House Democratic Caucus. And that quote was, it's been difficult for the FCC to move forward without Congress getting in the way. And that's certainly the case here, but it's only because of representatives of the chairman's own party. And I've been struck in recent days by how vociferous the opposition has been. For example, 55 House Democrats told the FCC to suspend further action until studies are done. The House Chief Democratic Whip, Ron Kynes, said that content protection, privacy, and enforcement are issues that have not been adequately addressed. Even outside of the confines of Congress, the CEO of Roku Player says that the Unlock the Box scheme, quote, won't help consumers and is unnecessary government intervention. The producer of The Walking Dead said that this scheme would spell disaster and, quote, should never have been brought back from the dead. Now, you don't have to rely on Republican FCC commissioners for our views on this. Just listen to what other people are saying. Now, I think it's pretty clear that given some of the opposition we've seen from the MVPDs, given the opposition we've seen from the content industry, given the opposition we've seen within the halls of Congress, it might suggest to a fact-based agency that wants to proceed on a consensus basis that it should take some time here instead of barreling ahead with the scheme that is going to be very expensive and doesn't work. Now, with respect to the Comcast offering in particular, this is what I find very amusing about this situation. So on one hand, if Comcast had done nothing, I guarantee the chairman would have said, see, this proves that the FCC is on the right track. We need to create more competition here. Comcast now having made this offering, the chairman says, see, this proves that what I'm doing is the right thing. There's no falsifiable thesis here for the FCC because it's on a maniacal drive to highly regulate this marketplace yet again. Secondly, the reason why Comcast's private arrangement with Samsung is different is specifically because of that. It was a private arrangement in which Comcast was able to negotiate such things as content protection and privacy protections that you would not get under the FCC's mandated scheme. Under the FCC scheme, you simply open it up, and it's sort of a Wild West. There are no protections for content and privacy, which is exactly why the content industry has been saying, almost with uniform voice, we don't like this plan. And so the notion that Comcast's private offering, which contains these protections, is somehow emblematic of the way the world would operate if the FCC scheme were universally applied, is completely false.
I agree with what my colleague has just indicated. I'll add that your question was also, have I reached out to those Democrats? I have not as of yet, but I'm happy to provide any advice and thoughts and whatever I can to those individuals or any member of Congress. I have a great, hopefully, working relationship with Congress, and I'll assist them in any possible way I can. There's only so much a minority commissioner can do here. We do tend to lose a lot.
Should they view this as an invitation?
What's that?
Should they view that as an invitation to give you a call?
I'm available for any member of Congress on any issue. If they are interested, I'm certainly happy to help them in any way I possibly can.
I agree.
John McKinnon from the Wall Street Journal. So this is another example of an issue where you are probably looking to the Hill for at least some backup and some assistance, and we saw that also in Lifeline. I mean, there are countless issues where you would like to get some help from Congress, I think, but it seems like there's not actually that much that has a clear path to becoming law anytime soon. Can you just talk about why that is, or why you think that there's been little action in this policy area in this Congress, and what do you hope to see happen realistically in the rest of this Congress?
I'm not sure exactly which issue you speak of. Well, in terms of the Hill, I don't seek the Hill out for backup purposes. I express my views. They tend to, sometimes like my people I've worked with or even others agree, and they express their views. In terms of I think if you're getting into the process reform structure, that I've put 24 different ideas out on process reform. They have the Congress and both the House and the Senate have pursued different reform ideas. At some moments, I have weighed in when asked or appropriate. I've weighed in on their efforts. Whether Congress will legislate in that space or not is for them to determine. The issues in terms of legislating, I could have asked, and 2 years ago I could have answered better than I can now in terms of why things can or cannot move. But I hear, from just as many people across the aisle that they have problems with where the commission's going, but don't see the ability to get to the legislating side yet.
A couple of different points I'd like to make. First, I think that Congress operates independently of us. As the commissioner said, we don't instigate them. So, for example, when Senator McCaskill asked us all, do we believe in certain principles with respect to Lifeline, including a cap, that wasn't at our instigation. When Congresswoman DeJette had an exchange with the chairman, which she said, look, can't you just answer the question about FCC process reform, that wasn't at our instigation. When Congresswoman Clark said she wanted a GAO investigation into the set-top box scheme, that wasn't at our instigation. That's because these are independently empowered members of Congress who take their oversight responsibilities seriously. And like the commissioner, I view my function vis-a-vis the Hill as one of being an aide. If they have a question about a particular matter, whether it be pending legislation or a particular issue and how it's proceeding at the FCC, I'd be happy to assist them. But I don't see it as my role either to tell them what to do or to gin them up, so to speak, to make public pronouncements. Secondly, I think Congress has been making remarkable progress in this area. Just today, for example, they passed a number of bills out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Earlier today as well, the overall House passed the Carries Law Act of 2015, something that I've been urging for some time. On the Senate side, the Senate Commerce Committee has passed FCC reauthorization legislation, which I'm generally supportive of. So I think there is, on both sides of Capitol Hill, some effort to change the law in order to better improve the FCC's processes and decisions. The problem thus far has been that the FCC leadership simply doesn't care what Congress has to say, and it's going to ignore, as we saw in the context of JSAs, even the enacted law of Congress as signed by the president. That's a problem that, frankly, is beyond the power of any single member of Congress to overcome.
There have been a bunch of great policy questions here, so Commissioner Pai, if you'd forgive an offbeat question, I'm interested how you choose the movies that you reference in your statements. Is there, does it just come to you? How does that happen?
That's a great question. So sometimes it depends.
I don't know if it's that great.
So sometimes it really depends. As we're reading through a statement, we often have just a basic, just the facts approach and try to figure out, how are we going to approach an issue. And then sometimes a movie will just suggest itself to me.
Based on those facts?
Oh, yeah, based on those facts. Sometimes it's just a random. There's a decision called Soundbite a couple of years ago where we were talking about the fact that under the FCC's regulations and the law, there wasn't clear rules, and it occurred to me, Walter Sobchak, Big Lebowski. This isn't Smokey. This isn't Nom. This is bowling. We need to have rules. That's the kind of thing that just sort of the inspiration that springs to me. I just wish I could devote it to something more socially productive, like curing cancer or writing the next great American novel. But it really does depend, and I have to give a lot of the credit to my office as well. My coworkers do a fantastic job of making suggestions. Usually they are in the vein of cutting out my movie references and other pop cultural references because I'm laying it on too thick. I, for one, was dying to go with a full Prince on a special access. I mean, come on, let's party like it's 1999, the Clinton-era deregulatory framework. There were so many references there were just screaming out to be included, but wiser heads prevailed, and I lost.
Glad I asked.
I think what the commissioner is saying is actually does get thicker. He has to pull back by steps, right?
Before we go here, anyone over here?
This is for Commissioner Pai. Have you ever suggested edits in an item that, if they were approved by the chairman and the majority, would allow you to get some of those pop culture references in that you've been wanting to get in?
Oh, boy, that is a good question. Sorry, so have I ever gotten edits that, if accepted, would lead to
you actually asked for the edits just to get the pop culture reference in.
Not that I can think of. I think... no. No, the two inquiries are entirely independent, and
that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Any other pressing inquiries?
Don't judge.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Commissioner Pai, that you were not the one referenced on the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
No, I'm a fan of the show, but at this point, if they could cast me in Better Call Saul season 3, that I will take as a cardinal achievement. So, yeah.
I figured you dropped the Master of None reference. Maybe you hope Netflix would take notice and shout you out. But
no, next time.
What's the Kimmy Schmidt reference?
So Chairman Wheeler was part of the substance of a joke that was at the end of the season. It was really actually about Verizon.